Dead by Daylight is almost 9 years old, and yet it remains janky, chaotic, unbalanced, and broken. But what's always drawn me to mid games is the fundamentals, the premise, what they promise they can do, and the rare times when those promises genuinely get fulfilled. And the character of Ghostface is one such example. For its 12th chapter, Dead by Daylight introduced Danny Johnson as its newest playable killer. Ghostface. Except Danny Johnson wasn't in any of the Scream films. And Ghostface is normally said as a single word in the movies, so what's the deal? Since Behavior Interactive only acquired the license for The Mask, which is owned by Funworld, they couldn't use any character from the Scream movies. Instead, he's an original character donning the familiar mask, and while the classic black shroud is available, Behavior also decided to give his default look something of a makeover. This Ghostface is new. He is, for all intents and purposes, a brand new character, but he's also a reinterpretation of an existing one, and that makes for a very intriguing foundation. His name is Danny Johnson, and he is a journalist reporting on, you guessed it, his own crimes, taking selfies and snapping photos of his victims for publicity. He's got the playfulness and energy of the film Ghostfaces, but with something they're missing: competence. Danny is presented as an experienced killer moving from town to town. Unlike every other Ghostface, he's never been caught and killed. He doesn't call his victims beforehand on their phone. He stalks them for hours, taking notes and planning out elaborate murder schemes. There's elements of the movie Ghostface there, but nowhere near to this level of method. He also has the ego. In one memory, he's enraged at tabloid writers making a parody of his mask, mocking his reputation. He stalks these young writers, imagining how he'll violently kill them, getting angry at their lack of understanding of art. For all of his method, he's still just as immature, pretentious, and psychotic as all the other people under the mask. When he catches them making fun of his favorite fictional killers, then he goes off the rails, abandoning his previous plans and simply butchering them all on the spot. He's so very different from other Ghostfaces, but everything about him seems to carry the spirit of that iconic character within. Ghostface wouldn't be Ghostface without some playfulness. Out of all the classic slasher killers, with the exception of Freddy, Ghostface has always exuded the most personality, both bumbling and vicious all at once. They began their phone calls jokingly, almost flirtatiously, before transitioning into something genuinely scary.
On a date?
Maybe. Do you have a boyfriend?
No.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
What did you say? Listen, asshole!
No, you listen, you little bitch. You hang up on me again, I'll gut you like a fish, understand? Yeah,
Is this some kind of joke?
more of a game, really.
And despite every Scream film having new killer reveals, despite there constantly being multiple people under the mask, those traits of Ghostface have never faded. There have been many faces and motivations, but somehow when that mask comes on, that's not Stu or Billy or any other killer, it's just Ghostface. That killer seems to take priority over whoever lies underneath. Danny Johnson retains many characteristics of Ghostface in his costume, most obviously with the iconic mask, which is something you see every Halloween at this point. While the rest of his costume seems custom and original, his mask stays as the classic store-bought plastic. It references The Scream by Edward Munch, and there's something about its exaggerated proportions that make it cheap and silly, but also a little unnerving. The rest of Danny's costume reflects his experience without abandoning the little flourish that the killers always have. Unlike the flowing black robes that could be bought from any old store, his costume is tighter, looking almost combat ready with its more solid leather and denim. It looks firm and comfortable in many areas rather than being loose. He's even got proper cuffs on his sleeves. There are straps to hold his clothing in place, and his shroud is padded with lines that feel more weighty without harming the silhouette. This does not feel like a Ghostface from the movies, who always seems to get hit and knocked over. In fact, this clothing is almost tactical, and yet it's not dissonant. Firstly, it's surprisingly fashionable, being very clearly custom made to go with the mask. The tree stripes on the hood and layers of leather break it up, giving it some accents. There's also these streamers that hang from his robe. His outfit may be tighter fitting, but it makes up for the lack of flowing robes with the floating streamers. They float behind him when he runs, mimicking the flowing black robes of the originals. The description says all there is to know about him, for the killer that needs concealment but craves attention. And in the realm of the entity, these streamers float unnaturally, indicating the supernatural influence given to him. In Dead by Daylight, he's a little more than human, and I think those little bits of cloth sell that very well. Unlike most ghost faces, Danny is very good at killing. But much like the other ghost faces, he doesn't just do it, he revels in it and he craves that public attention. And that outfit lets him kill effectively while keeping that spectacle. There's something to be said about what was lost with this depiction. One is ambiguity. Looking at other horror icons, their absolute nature often makes them feel like guaranteed harbingers of death. There is little ambiguity to the appearance of Michael, Jason, Freddy, or Chucky. You pretty much know you're dead when they're walking towards you. But Ghostface, lacking any real supernatural power or distinctive identifier, brings that into question. This could be Ghostface, yeah, but in the town of Woodsboro on Halloween, it could also just be a harmless guy in a costume. And so, in many ways, the classic look of Ghostface almost feels like an animal, something potentially dangerous even if you can't fully be sure. I'm reminded of the moments before he kills Tatum Riley, wherein she mistakes him for just another partygoer, playing around with him a little before he pulls out the knife. This new design doesn't have that. His costume feels designed solely for killing, not to blend into a crowd. There's also the fact that he's pretty lacking in slapstick, moments that make him such a funny killer. Getting hit in the face by a fridge door and pelted with bottles and getting hit by a piano. Sorry, forget that last one. But I think that much of this is simply a side effect of Dead by Daylight's context. After all, there's no real situation in which a killer becomes physically disabled for more than a second. Perhaps the pallet stun sound could be a bit more than a frustrated breath, which, while funny, is a little disappointing. In-game, he feels like a far more vicious killer. But with the game's power dynamic, that being survivors' inability to directly fight back, that decision makes sense. Ghostface cannot be a bumbling idiot because of the nature of the game he's in. The most humiliation he can suffer would be getting teabagged at the exit gate. And finally, he doesn't necessarily care much for horror movies. His additional tome lore indicates that he still idolizes fictional serial killers, but that's not really a thing in any of his visual look. But there's something to be said, I think, about his placement in a game already full of these icons. Rather than parodying or being derivative of them, it's like he's come into his own. You can still see how his stalk mechanic took inspiration from Michael Myers, much like his movie counterparts. But it's also a nice thought that Wes Craven's iconic pastiche of horror has become a legend in itself. And hey, it's certainly what Danny Johnson wants. Now, I've talked about his costume, but how does any of this translate in-game? There are a couple of simple but effective things that make up for that lack of novelty or quirkiness in his movie counterparts. On one hand, his actual ability, which every killer gets, doesn't seem to be the most unique. He stares at people to stalk them, similarly to Michael Myers, and stalking someone fully exposes them, allowing you to down them in a single hit. Like I said earlier, whether intentional or not, the similarity to Myers is pretty neat given how much Ghostface idolizes Halloween. But while there isn't much you can do with Myers besides breaking his line of sight, Ghostface is countered by staring right back at him. Doing so breaks him out of his stealth mode, which allows survivors to hear your terror radius again, which is that heartbeat that normally plays when a killer is nearby. Ghostface then needs to wait a couple seconds before suppressing it again. Ghostface is also able to lean while stalking, which fills the meter up much faster, encouraging you to make use of cover. Myers stands imposingly out in the open, but Ghostface doesn't have that luxury, always sneaking around. It's another way the movies show that they're only human. Alongside this is his ability to crouch. It's a physical effort we don't really see from many other killers. As a matter of fact, it makes him much more like a survivor. It has the same thematic effect as The Pig, but while Amanda Young is genuinely a human survivor in some way, Ghostface's crouch is entirely mimicry. The ability is thematically interesting, but it's also scuffed. It's not very good. Sometimes Ghostface might get revealed even when he's behind cover. Sometimes Ghostface can't be revealed even when out in the open. But conceptually, there's a lot to love about it. Michael Myers' stock buildup affected every survivor on the map, reflecting his slow increase in aggression throughout his film as he became more and more unstoppable. The Ghostfaces, on the other hand, have always focused on isolating their targets and often find themselves in trouble once confronted by more than one person. And so, stalking someone only affects that one target that he finds at an opportune time. Now, while Michael Myers' stalk can be avoided by breaking line of sight, he can't actually be put at a direct disadvantage. But the fact that you can break Ghostface out of his stealth mode reflects some vulnerability. We do, after all, see the killer get the wind knocked out of him. We see him struggle, in a way far more human than many others. Stretching too far and getting too ambitious, like most Ghostfaces, will end in your downfall. And yet, there is one thing Ghostface has that makes him a little less vulnerable. Survivors who have been fully exposed by Ghostface, who become one-hit downs, are unable to break him out of his stealth mode. If you take too long, if you're not careful enough, he's still deadly. And when we see Ghostface alone with someone, they can get pretty brutal. The last thing on our list is the humor and personality. Even if the game can't have humor at the expense of Ghostface, it can still keep his quirkiness. Ghostface walks with his knife in hand like most other killers, but he raises it into the iconic psycho pose while in the chase. His attack animation ends with the infamous knife wipe. His leaning animation while stalking is honestly pretty damn funny, and it's hard to explain why. He's also one of two killers who can crouch. I mentioned earlier that it makes him more like a survivor, one exerting more physical effort. But this also has a more meta effect. He can teabag. And that sounds like a silly thing to point out in a character analysis, but in a multiplayer game, one where player expression arrives from bare-bones communication, it's surprisingly notable. Whether it be used as a gesture of friendliness or mockery, it's something you see with most Ghostface players. It almost becomes a personality trait, something everyone associates with him, just as pig players demand their snout be booped, or how some slinger players will headbang violently while reeling their targets in. And unlike some killers where that real player element can make the killer feel incongruent with their personality, it kinda fits Ghostface, almost making up for that lack of ambiguity that I mentioned earlier. Perhaps he's being friendly, or maybe he's just mocking you before going in for the kill. And of course, to finish things off, we have the kill itself. Every killer has a Mori, and it's usually fantastic, bringing together that killer's personality, abilities, and quirks in one big kill animation. And Ghostface's Mori, well, I feel like it's not easy to be very iconic in a game so chock full of horror icons, especially when you're more of a reinterpretation than the actual character. And yet, Ghostface stands among them. Part of it is, I think, that even if you haven't seen the Scream movies, you've definitely seen that mask. And this Mori animation, along with the rest of his character and presentation, tells you everything you need to know about what kind of killer Ghostface is. He's many things, but what this animation tells me above everything else is exactly what Ghostface wants. He wants to be unforgettable. And that he is. Thank you very much for watching this very short video. It's a bit of a strange one, I'm not gonna lie. I decided to group it with that Morgoth analysis that I did a while back, which is like this one. It's a shorter video looking at one specific character. I may have gone overboard discussing, a killer from a low-stakes silly crossover game, but, what can I say? I like Ghostface and I like the Scream movies. I might do more of these in the future for characters that especially speak to me or that I think are worthy of their own video. Mikola from Elden Ring is one I want to do, although I don't know how long it's gonna take. Regardless, the next video should be, if everything goes well, about the devil. I hope you enjoy it.